Mr. Dean Thompson, it's very good to have you here. Welcome to Craiova.
Thank you. It's really great to be here, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
You have worked in diplomatic missions all over the world, from Paraguay to Sri Lanka to India, and since 2014 you've been assigned to Romania. What are the highlights of your Romanian experience up to now?
There are so many. I've enjoyed being in Romania tremendously. As you know, it's my first time living in Europe. I worked on some European issues before I joined the State Department, so it's been a great opportunity to come and live in a country that's a NATO ally, that's a member of the European Union. We've had a wonderful opportunity to get around and see the country. This is my second visit to Craiova, and very fortunate circumstances today to be here for the announcement of some major new U.S. investments. I've had the opportunity to travel over to the coast and to the Danube Delta, do some ecological work and support some great ecological efforts that are going on there. I've been up to Transylvania and that whole beautiful area of the country to see some of the old history from that region. And then last year I had the chance to go down to the Iron Gates and the Gorge, the Danube Gorge region. So I've been very fortunate, and I've enjoyed getting to know Romania and understand the country a little better.
Great. So Romanians are so focused sometimes on what's going wrong in their country that they tend to forget what's going well. So what do you think is the bright spot in Romania? What are we doing well at this point?
There are so many bright spots in Romania right now. I think as you look at Romania in the region that you're in, you're a very stable force in terms of democracy, in terms of the fight against corruption, in terms of governance. I think there's a lot of positive efforts going on there. Doesn't mean there's not still work to do sometimes, that's okay. But there's a great story to be told about the direction things are headed. Today's event that brought me to Craiova, the expansion of the Ford plant and the new line of vehicles that's going to be produced there, is another great story. I think we're seeing more and more interest in a healthy, economically strong Romania that wants to play a very important commercial role in the region. And in fact, as you know, we have a very, very vibrant strategic partnership with Romania. And while that has been focused a lot in the past on things like security cooperation, law enforcement, counterterrorism, we're expanding it a great deal into the economic and commercial realm. And that's both at the idea of the Romanian government, but also the interest, I think, of U.S. businesses to know more about what's happening here.
Great. So what brings you today to Craiova?
Well, as you know, the Ford plant here is expanding its operations. They've announced today a 200 million euro additional investment. They're going to start manufacturing the new EcoSport, which is a new line of car here. They've been manufacturing here, I believe, for about 8 years now, and this is a big expansion. A couple hundred new jobs will be created, but really it's also, I think, a great signal of the interest, not only in Romania, but in southern Romania and this region as well. And so we're hopeful that Ford's decision is also going to spur a lot of interest in the part of other auto manufacturers, perhaps auto parts manufacturers. And I don't know if you're familiar or not, but our embassy's been doing a lot to promote entrepreneurship in Romania. And so we're always keen to help deliver the message about the importance of a strong entrepreneurial spirit, the importance of risk-taking, and people trying to start businesses and make an effort to grow the economy, because we think Romania has tremendous potential on that front.
Great. Regarding the developments in this financial investment region from the Americans in Romania and especially in Oltenia, are you aware of any specific plans apart from what Ford, the great news about Ford, specific investment plans in our region?
Yeah, I'm not. So I know that there are several car part manufacturers that are here. Ford is the one I've been focused on most recently, so I'm most familiar with that. That said, I think there's some tremendous opportunity in the transportation realm, in the IT realm, in the manufacturing realm, and so I hope we're going to continue to see opportunities grow in those areas. We are certainly advising U.S. companies when they come and talk to us to look all across Romania and certainly to this area, given the experience Ford and others have had here.
You've said in one of your previous interviews that not everybody who wants to invest in Romania comes to the embassy to do this.
Right.
So how would you go about in improving the role of the embassy in aiding and counseling the potential investors?
Well, I think there's a number of things an embassy can do, right? An embassy can have a sense of what the opportunities are in a country. We do an annual report called the Country Commercial Guide, which discusses all of the opportunities by sector in Romania. It talks about what works very well. It talks about areas where companies might have had challenges. It gives examples of experiences, if you will. And so we put a lot of work into that to try to help companies have a bit of a sense of what's happening. But the truth is, we put a lot of stock in the importance of the host country developing the infrastructure, developing the business and economic climate to be attractive. At the end of the day, we don't see a big difference between a business climate or an investment climate that's attractive to foreign investors. We just see one that's attractive to investors, period. And so as Romania, in terms of the private sector, the public sector, whether it's through partnership or the policies they adopt on their own, we think it's important for it to continue to create stable, predictable, transparent mechanisms so that companies, when they do come in, they can easily find answers to their questions. They can make partnerships quickly and have a very confident feeling about any money they invest here.
Thank you. So, since this is not your first time visiting our region, what do you think are the weaknesses and the strengths of Oltenia when it comes to?
Well, the strengths are, I think, very clearly your people and the excellent workforce that's here, the natural beauty. It's a wonderful area to drive through, to come from Bucharest, and then even to go even further west. There's just some spectacular opportunities, I think, for tourism and greater travel potential. I think the same problem that plagues Oltenia is the same one that plagues a lot of parts of Romania, and that is there just needs to be a continued emphasis on infrastructure development, right? And the road and rail network, things like that, are being improved. And I think there's a very serious effort underway right now to do those things. But those are the types of things we continually hear from companies is, if we just knew the roads were going to be finished by this point or done and ready for more traffic or whatever it is, I think that's going to be a huge catalyst then for even further interest on the business front.
Great. So the US right now is not one of the top 10 investors in Romania. What do you think can be done by Romania for this to change?
Yeah.
How can we bring more US investors?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll challenge you just a little bit with that, because I agree with you. If you look at the official statistics, right, I think we're 11 or 12, something like that. But the truth is, if you look at brands and you look at the parent companies of many of the investments that are in Romania, a lot of them are U.S. brands and a lot of them are U.S. companies. So we feel we are here in a very significant and major way. And in fact, the American Chamber of Commerce a couple of years ago did a study to look at the net employment opportunities created by U.S. companies. And when you look at the parent companies, you look at the overall picture of U.S. brands that are here, I think you'll find that we're a significant employer and a significant investor, probably in the top 5, to be honest with you.
And how can we become even better at attracting American investors?
I think by continuing to do the great things that are being done right now, by creating more stable regimes. So for example, a lot of companies want to be able to plan when they come in. When they create their business plan, they need to know what's the tax regime going to look like, what's the infrastructure going to look like. So making sure things are very predictable and very stable on those fronts. When new legislation is passed, we hope to see more and more stakeholder discussions taking place before anything is passed. We hope to see regulatory impact assessments done so that parliamentarians, when they pass a law, they have a high degree of confidence that they know what the outcome will be before they do that. And so we've been looking at opportunities to work with Romania to do that. I think there's going to be some really good efforts in the coming years to create the capability to do that. The World Bank is working here on these types of projects. We continue to partner with the government through our action plans on these types of projects. And so we're really hoping that that will become the norm. And the more you have these stakeholder dialogues, the more you have these impact assessments done, the greater confidence there is when people want to bring their money in.
Thank you. So Romania climbed from the 69th to the 58th place in the Transparency International Corruption Index. There are some definite changes when it comes to the battle against corruption.
Right.
How do you see the current setting in Romania's struggle with corruption?
Well, as I said at the front end, I think Romania is making some terrific strides in the fight against corruption, and we hope very much that it will continue. And we've seen a very strong commitment on the part of Romanian authorities to make sure it continues. And so, as Romania sets itself apart regionally, as a country that doesn't tolerate corruption, that recognizes that if you don't have clear, transparent, stable mechanisms in place, that you can't attract the investment that you want, that you can't create the kind of safe and proper environment for your own citizens, the more they do in moving forward on the anti-corruption front, the better off everyone is going to be as we go down these other paths. So I think Romania is making tremendous headway, and we look forward to working with it to continuing that progress.
Great. So regarding some criticism that have been brought against DNA and maybe them being a bit too harsh, what is your view on DNA's performance?
Well, look, it's very far from my prerogative to grade entities or anything like that. We work very closely with all the authorities in Romania, and I think what's key is that they continue to have dialogue with one another, that they continue to look at what's going to be best for the country in the long run. DNA, DCOT, the police, they're sending very strong signals right now. They're telling people that crime doesn't pay, that you need to follow the rules. And so it's what we see as most important is protecting the independence of all the various entities. So the judicial elements, the rule of law agencies, they need to be able to operate independently without outside interference or influence. And so I think we're seeing that happen more and more, and it's a great thing. So we will continue to be proponents of the fight against corruption, but we hope all Romanians will engage themselves in this discussion and in the decisions about how it will proceed going forward, as well as with your EU partners, because obviously the CVM mechanism is a very important component to this right now as well.
Thank you. So moving on a bit into the international stage, President Barack Obama was quoted as saying, and it's a bit of a longish quote, so here, we dropped more ordnance on Cambodia and Laos than on Europe in World War II, yet ultimately Nixon withdrew, Kissinger went to Paris, and all we left behind was chaos, slaughter, and authoritarian governments that finally, over time, have emerged from that hell. when I go to visit those countries, I'm going to try to figure out how we can today help them to remove the bombs that are still blowing off the legs of little kids. In what way did that strategy promote our interests, end quote. This suggests a shift in US foreign policy, or at least in the way President Obama sees the world. The US has been accused recently of not being active enough in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So what do you think about this non-interventionist philosophy?
Well, I think, first off, I wouldn't necessarily accept the premise that we haven't been involved enough. I mean, I think we've been very involved. But what the President is primarily talking about is the importance of working with partners, with allies, and understanding that actions do have consequences. And so they need to be well thought out, and they need to be approached from a very sound basis, and with an end in mind, with an idea of how you will move the situation forward. And so when it comes to the situation, Ukraine is one of them, Syria is one of them, Libya, the refugee situation in Europe, all of these are important issues that have to be dealt with from a partnership standpoint. They can't be done alone. No one country is going to have the answer to this. So I think that's what you're seeing in terms of the President's approach, is a real strong desire, an acknowledgement that the U.S. has an important leadership role, but that it's not something we're going to be able to take on alone if we want to be successful in a long-term outcome.
Thank you. Moving on back home, the Deveselo anti-missile system cost around $143 million and serves mainly as a protection against Russia. But Russia at the same time is not standing still. There are sources that talk about them developing new missiles, the caliber missiles, which could reach any targets in Europe. So we are playing right now a kind of a cat and mouse game with Putin and with Russia. And my question is, how can we make sure that we stay the cat and not become the mouse?
Well, first off, let's go back to the premise of the question, because it's very, very important that we be absolutely 100% clear about Deveselo. Deveselo is part of an overall plan for NATO missile defense, and it's aimed at threats from outside the Euro-Atlantic region. So with respect to Russia, it does not defend against Russia, and it's not designed to take Russia into account. It's designed to look at threats from outside. Now, by doing that, it changes the strategic equation, right? It removes a point of leverage by countries from outside Europe to thinking they can use ballistic missiles as a means of putting pressure or undue influence. Now, Russia has made some statements about Deveselo. It has discussed it in ways that, frankly, are incorrect. The Russians are well aware that Deveselo is not designed to counter Russian military equipment or Russia's capabilities. And so we need to be very, very clear about what it is, what it's capable of doing, and what we intend to do with it in the future. When we talk about Russia and its activities in the region more broadly, separate from Deveselo, which does not have an impact on that, obviously we're watching with great concern what kinds of things have happened in Ukraine, the illegal annexation of Crimea, and we think it's incredibly important that our allies and partners like Romania and the others in the region continue to stand strong, that the EU continue to be unified in its approach to dealing with Russia. We want to continue to make it possible for Romania to develop a strong economy, to continue to move towards energy security so that they're not reliant on any one particular source of energy. And by doing all of these things, we believe we create an atmosphere that adds to the stability of the region. So we look forward to continuing to work on all those fronts.
Thank you. So the Kozloduy nuclear plant is 60 kilometers from Deveselo. It's also 60 kilometers from Craiova. it has been undergoing an expansion process, and there are quite a few voices, at least here in our region, which oppose all of this. Do you see the current expansion plans as posing any kind of threat to our region?
I don't. I'm not aware of the whole situation with that plant, but I would say that anytime you're looking at new energy plants and anytime you're looking at new expansion of energy systems like that, it's just important to take all the stakeholders into account and to see, what the concerns are. But with respect to that particular plant, I can't really speak to it. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a bit about our profession, about journalism,
Yeah.
and the movie Spotlight won the Best Picture from...
I just saw it last weekend.
It's a wonderful movie.
Yeah, it's really good.
And it's about a team of journalists, investigative journalists at Boston Globe, who do a wonderful job at investigating the church. And this kind of serious, hardcore journalism that they've done is more and more difficult to do nowadays, because it takes a lot of time to do investigative journalism, it takes a lot of resources, and you can work for a year to get a good subject. And the US is no longer financing press freedom activities in places such as Romania, because we are considered a much more developed country. So considering the fact that the investigative journalism can be viewed as a backbone for democracy,
Right.
how do you think, how do you see the future of investigative journalism, and how could the US be of any help in supporting it?
Well, first off, I agree with you 100% that investigative journalism and more broadly journalism in general, the rights of a free press, are the fundamental backbone to any free society. And so, one, I think all of us as consumers of the news have to have a very strong appreciation for the work that the journalists are out there doing, certainly under difficult circumstances, sometimes under life-threatening circumstances. And so I think it's critically important we recognize that. The U.S. has been very active around the world in supporting the rights of journalists to report, in terms of trying to create atmosphere in which freedom of the press is respected and understood. We have actually been doing support for journalists and entities that do investigative journalism in terms of training opportunities. We have something every year called the International Visitor and Leadership Program, where we invite groups of journalists back to the United States so they can develop stronger networks with their colleagues in the field. So we always are looking for opportunities to do those things. But you're right, the resource question is a big one, and not just in Romania, not just in Europe, in the United States as well. Everybody is looking at the question of newspapers and investigative journalism and how do you deal with the resource constraints. And so I think this is a challenge that's going to continue for the next few years, but it's why all of us that value so much a free press and the right to information need to be supportive of these entities and try to find ways to make it a viable business for them as well.
Thank you. Let's talk about a bit about what happened this morning in Brussels.
Yeah,
Terrorism is more and more a threat, and it's coming nearer to us. There have been bombings at the airport, and then today 2 metro stations in Brussels. There have been bombings a little while ago in Ankara, and people are feeling this. Terrorism has come close to home, and recently, Secretary of State John Kerry said that the Islamic State is also committing genocide. He used this word in Syria and Iraq. So, what can something be done against this kind of very devious and hidden enemy, such as a terrorist?
Absolutely. Let me start by absolutely offering condolences to the family, friends, and loved ones of anyone who was hurt or killed today. The news out of Brussels was indeed very sad. But I think it's incredibly important that even in the light of bad news like that out of Brussels, or bad news like we saw out of Ankara recently, for us to remember that we are part of one of the most successful alliances in the history of the world, that the partnership that the United States and Europe have with respect to counterterrorism is effective and is making a huge difference as we try to interdict, as we try to make sure that these people are not able to perpetrate these bad acts, and as we try to keep more and more people away from the terrorist groups themselves. You know, we know that they recruit using all kinds of different means, and so we try to make it very clear to people that this is not a path that leads anywhere but to death and destruction. So on all of those fronts, we're firmly committed to working with our partners, and especially great partners like Romania, with whom we have a very close working relationship, tremendous cross-training that we do, sharing of information. There's lots of reasons to be optimistic in terms of who will prevail in the long run here. But we have to stay united, we have to keep the pressure on, and we have to look for ways to learn more and more about how these groups operate and how we can better fight them before these types of things happen.
Thank you. So moving on to what's happening right now in your home country. After the first black president, there's another historical change poised to happen in the near future. You will either have a woman president or a very radical figure. I'm talking about Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump.
Sure.
Donald Trump, who the Spiegel considers the world's most dangerous man. So, I know it's a difficult question, but from your personal perspective, how do you see the developments?
Sure. Well, obviously, you've raised a really interesting question with regard to the United States right now. And just for the sake of your viewers and your audience, I think it's important to remind that where we are right now in the process is still quite early. We're in the primaries, so this is the parties working out who will be their respective candidates. And so I think we're about halfway through that process. There are more states to come. As a diplomat, obviously, I'm precluded from commenting about any of the candidates and precluded from discussing the partisan political process in the United States. But I think what you're seeing and what you always see in an election is a reflection of attitudes in a society. And so, I think what's going to be very important is for people, especially our friends and allies around the world, to take a long view on this. Don't base any assumptions on what's happening right this minute, but consider what the debates and discussions will look like as we move into the general election and to the election itself come next November, because that's when I think we'll start to see the real policies, the real ideas and attitudes become clearer.
So now it's more circus than actual.
Well, I shouldn't comment on anything like that. I think what's important to remember is this is all part of a much longer process, and it's probably more important to look at the entire process than any one moment in time as you go through it.
Mr. Dean Thompson, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us, and we hope you will be back in Craiova again, and we await your visit at Alege TV once more.
Well, thank you, and I hope to be back soon. It's been a wonderful time.
Thank you.